Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we've got 30 in the room, Sam. So I mean,
okay.
if Nora's recording and you're ready, then we could just start if you want.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, good morning and thanks for dialing in. This is the second or probably third presentation. We did one at the AGM. James did one last week, I think, or the week before. So this is part of the suite of presentations. Understand how important the Building Safety Act and the secondary legislation is to everyone in practice, and particularly the role of principal designer. So we're going to have a chat about that after the presentation. So first slide, Nora. So as I think we're all familiar with now, the legislation, the Act itself was published last year in 2022. But with any Act, they only really set out some of the principles that we'll be working to. It doesn't give any idea of detail. And it's only when the secondary legislation is published as statutory instruments that you get an idea of what is required. I think in my generation, we use secondary legislation all the time, but nowadays there's a lot more guidance, and I operate in Scotland, so we have technical guidance for regulations, and I know you've got similar things in England. But for this piece of legislation, it caught us all off guard. Very rarely does a piece of legislation published 2 or 3 weeks before it is actually affected. So we came into force on the 1st of October, and a slightly different model than we did expect. So we're all doing a bit of catch up, trying to make sure that our members can undertake this particular function. And I say the majority of people who are CIAT members can. And so that's what I'm going to go through is the various stages. So we've set up a content panel looking at the various legislation, and to give some ideas of what's inside the legislation, what it means to CIAT members. And the group I'm primarily involved in is a competency steering group. That's where my competence lies now, is in competencies. So as I said at the AGM, this has very much been driven by practice. So it's going to be practice led, because it's youth practitioners who need to provide evidence that you're competent to undertake this particular function. What I can do is I can write it in terms of competence and the kind of information that would be required to demonstrate. That's where my skill sets lie. I have practice in my time. I've run my own practice. I've been a director and partner in other practices and had senior roles. So I'm not unfamiliar with what happens in practice. And I still lecture at university in practice management. But the competency steering group was put together really to draw upon their experience to try and inform us in terms of what we need to do as an institute, both for buildings that might be deemed as we call higher risk buildings, and then non-HRBs, which are non-higher risk buildings. In my opinion, all buildings have a risk, and that differentiation is in the legislation, and that's what we have to work to. Whether I think it shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. It would appear from other information I'm receiving that probably building control might be splitting this into 3, but that's for later. But for now, we stick to HRBs and non-HRBs. But the key for us is really establishing what our members need to do as primarily as designers, but also in terms of what the principal designer needs to demonstrate in terms of competence. And within the legislation, you probably note that it covers all aspects of principal designer and any form of designer in a building that would impact on primarily the safety of that building in use. So that's another task I'm involved in, is a working group looking at the competencies for others other than PD, what one would need to demonstrate to be competent to undertake a function as, say, as a lead designer on a project, or as a designer of any component that may go into a building that could compromise safety and use. So that's a challenge in itself. So that's the background to what's going on. So next slide, Nora. So this is the kind of group that we've pulled together. Senior officers of the institute, president, immediate past president, vice presidents, practice and technical, and education, I think, was also involved in this. I think practices in terms of the various practices, and James very kindly put this together, managed to get people to commit time to undertake this particular function. And of course, the directors across the institute in terms of education and membership, and practice and technical. So James, Nora and Diane are here because that's their territory, and this is all interrelated. So again, we need to make sure we have UK representation, because although the Building Safety Act is primarily aimed at England and Wales, it also impacts on Northern Ireland and Scotland as well. But primarily this is for England and Wales, this particular function. Scotland's taking a different approach. Northern Ireland, I'm not quite sure what's happening there. Okay, next slide, Nora. So the competency steering group, we're trying to kind of, our terms of reference, in terms of what we're trying to do, in terms of looking at the legislation, looking at the competencies that are required for both roles as PDs, for HRBs, non-HRBs, that would then allow our members to register as PDs with CIAT. And that's the approach that we're taking, and it's not dissimilar to, and I know other institutes, obviously RIBA, are quite public about what they're doing, and I know one or two others are also taking a similar approach about registration for principal designers. But with competence, it's a bit like playing a sport. Since I know football reasonably well, or rugby, that you got to be fit to play, and it's about keeping yourself fit to play. So CPD will be an important part of demonstrating your fitness for purpose once you do become registered with us as a PD. So for once, I think CPD will be a very important element, and will become not just obligatory, it will become really a mandatory thing that one would have to do in terms of a PD role. Okay, next Nora. So with the steering group, we're looking at kind of establishing a competence performance, a kind of framework, determining the evidence required. So with competence, it's quite different from maybe the kind of qualifications that you might be normally used to, in university or college, or joining as a member of the institute. Although there are parallels with the institute in terms of what we are looking at, because James looks at your applications in terms of project material that you submit. That project material is then used as evidence to demonstrate that you meet the requirements in terms of designing and managing and practicing for us, in terms of and for that matter, the professional interview, which covers more of the conduct issues. So that's really in place. We're kind of probably using a lot of that as well to as evidence. So you really got that in the bag, so to speak. There might be some additional things, but again, we're trying to deal with things proportionally, and that's what we have to do. It's not about asking everybody to go back to stage one. We're recognising your prior learning and prior experience as evidence and demonstrating your competence. So it's that proportionality is really important. It's not. We don't want to be unreasonable. We want to be fair to our members, but we have to be fair to society, generally, to clients, to government and others, that we have a system in place that does verify that members are competent to undertake this function. So we're looking at what methods do we use to assess, and again, James and his team We've got very robust systems in terms of how we get people to register as chartered members. And again, we'll look at the CPD criteria to maintain registration. Next, Nora. For a while, we didn't really know what was happening with the criteria that was being used. I've been heavily involved in developing 8670 and 8671. 8670 is likely to become it is planned to be a British standard in early next year. So that'll become mandatory. Currently, a pass is a publicly available specification. It isn't really, it doesn't have any legal status as such. It's legally in terms of its advisory. But that's what we are now using. The RIV using it, and others are using it. I know the Engineering Council are using it, APS are using it as a basis by which we are determining our framework, and we're not going to deviate from that. Initially, because of my own experience in terms of competencies, I was developing something that was an all singing, all dancing model, because we believed that the government were asking for third-party accreditation, and thankfully they've moved away from that. So we're now in more control of what we need to do as an institute to create this framework, and therefore we're using the British Standards Institute documents, both in terms of the overall overarching framework, but also more specifically the specification for principal designers. Okay, next one, Nora. And again, you will probably see from the RIBA that they've aligned CDM with the PD for the building safety regulations, and within the pass 8671 is very clear they are two different functions. I know, I mean, how difficult it is in terms of CDM regulations, because your role as principal designer there is to look at that building in terms of the design impacting on the safety of those people who are constructing the building, or those people who might be maintaining the building or replacing things. It's a very different thing in terms of that risk, in terms of health and safety of the operatives, where this legislation is about the health and safety of that building in use as a product. So it's a bit like looking at a car. One is looking at the manufacturing process of that car and the safety of the people who are putting that car together. This legislation is very much you and I driving the car. Okay, it doesn't come, so make sure that the brakes are working and the headlights are working, all those things that are really important for the performance of the product. So it's very much the territory of architectural technologists in terms of producing buildings that work and perform over time. And that's really key. So it's not a major departure from things you do in your normal day jobs. So I'm quite pleased that that's what it's about. And that's what we're sticking to. We're not trying to confuse the two pieces of legislation. There's very two different things, and therefore we believe that 867 gives that legitimacy for the principal designer role, and that's what we will use for that particular function, as reinforced in the text within that document. Next one. So with competencies, there are two. I mean, I'm trying to make this as simple as I can make it. There's performance criteria that really sets out what one must be able to do. Okay, this is a difference between university. I'm judging people's ability to do something. So that's they're not necessarily demonstrating that they can do it, but this is about, so it's a shifting from ability and capability to competence is different. So you must be able to undertake this particular function and role. So the performance criteria, again, we're looking at 8671 in terms of the set criteria there. But like anything, it's really scope and range is really important. And that's where, you people that you're working in practice, I know when I worked in practice, it's probably worked in lots of hospital buildings. So my territory in terms of my performance criteria, if I ever was going to be as PD, would have been in hospital buildings. Say I wouldn't have moved into maybe commercial buildings because it's a different set of criteria maybe used for designing commercial buildings or residential buildings. So range and scope really give you, the ability to be absolutely comfortable that you're competent in the areas of your practice. And now I know there's discussions about what if I get a job in that is very different from things I do. Well, that's where you have to make a decision. That's where conduct comes in and behaviour about your competence. But that we'll park that one for now. But the performance criteria is really important. Underpinning the performance criteria is a knowledge and understanding. So it's making sure that there's an underbelly of knowledge and understanding about the ability to apply that knowledge and understanding in a workplace setting on a project. So again, as members, we're not going to dip into that in any depth, because you've demonstrated as chartered members of the Institute that you'll have that underpinning knowledge and understanding to undertake this particular function. So I don't expect anything hugely needed in that area. So that's hopefully a plus for everyone who's a chartered member. Okay, next one, Nora. And then looking at specifically the framework that we're going to use is very much based upon the documentation, certainly 8671 and 8670. And there's 4 key components. And although I had a hand in 8671, it very much overlays what we do in terms of determining what a charter member demonstrates. So there is a part, as you know, there's management in terms of what you do in a practice, managing your design work. You have your technical work, your legislation, and your behavioural is really your kind of things like your conduct. So I don't see any real issues for anybody being able to demonstrate that they are competent in these areas. So these are the kind of headline things. There's lots of subtext, but we're trying to kind of look at this currently and put it into a form that is usable and workable for you guys, not something that is unworkable, unpalatable, undigestible. So the past can be amended. We're not going to be deviating too much from what's written down, but we're going to write it in maybe a clearer and more comprehensive way. But these are the kind of key areas: the legislative and regulatory requirements, the management of your design work, and your technical work as well. So I don't see anything there. And the behavioural stuff is, again, we have a code of conduct, and I had a look at that a few weeks ago, and say that was written a long time ago. It has been amended over time, but about honesty and integrity, it's all part of the code. So I'm quite comfortable that as an institute we have mechanisms in place for ensuring our members do behave professionally and competently, and if they breach that code, then they come up against the conduct panel to answer the case against them. So we have systems in place. So I think that it's all really there. So hopefully the chartered professional qualification really gives us that robust standard that we're going to be using as a mechanism to demonstrate people who want to be PDs can do so. Next slide, Nora. So our priorities really for us is, I say, establishing a register. And I think, we've looked at 2 registers or 1 register, it doesn't really matter. If you're registered as a PD, whatever you're registered will be based upon what you registered, what your typology or your range or scope of the buildings that you should be working as a PD in that area. We're looking at, again, this is outside my territory, but certainly James has more experience on the CIAT specialist registers, both in the UK, but also in Ireland as well. So that we'll be drawing upon that experience. We'll have to train assessors in terms of assessing. And again, this is going to be light touch. I don't think we're going to be departing very much from our procedures that we do for membership. So it'll be a similar model. And the whole thing about us as an organisation, we've got to think about, again, CIAT's capability and capacity and resourcing considerations to run this particular scheme. And there will be a fee associated with that because it's not something that we can do for nothing. But we'll do that proportionally to make sure that it's in line with the effort that's put in, and to be on that register. So that will be hopefully in place early in the new year. I mean, initially, another thing that again we misread was, and I'm still trying to find out where the misinterpretation came from, but we all, including RIBA, ARB, and I work with all these people, Engineering Council, ICE, iStruct, SIMSE, we were all assuming that next April was when the PD for non-HRBs would come into place. So we're going to have to motor fairly fast because actually there is a thing that happens in April, but it does affect, I know it is affecting some people in practice now by demands from building control authorities asking for certain pieces of paper. So we'll do our best to work over the Christmas period to get this put in place and try as best we can after New Year. And I'm not going to put any deadlines on anybody, but we certainly will try and do our best to get this speedily in place through the development of what's required, the evidence required. I mean, we've got regular meetings with the team to get this moved forward, and hopefully we'll get that into place. But to be very clear, this is for chartered members, members and fellows, because we believe that's the benchmark that we're trying to set for this particular function. Next. And again, these are some of the background appendices legislation that we're working to. There's far more than is there as other legislation that's affected by the Building Safety Act and the secondary legislation. And I think you could make a life job out of all this if you're in the legal profession. I understand there's issues for all you in practice. There's things that certainly out with my comfort zone, but I know there's professional indemnity insurance issues, there's practice issues, there's appointment issues, there's a whole range of things, and we're doing our best to work through those. So that's really just a very brief presentation, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions, and certainly James, Nora, and Dan's here as well. So thanks for listening. Okay, any questions?
I have a question, Sam, if that's possible.
Yep, okay.
Hi, I'm Andrew from ASG Architects in Telford. We seem to be obviously exposed between now and the 6th of April on some projects, maybe, where there's the principal designer CDM and principal designer building control now being asked for from typically building reg applications, where we're being asked to put, are we the principal designer for building regs, principal designer for CDM. I've done principal designer courses with the RIBA. I'm an architect as well, but we seem to be stuck in maybe a 6-month gap where we don't really have the qualifications or the backup from CIAT or RIBA to say that we are PD building regs or PD CDM. What's your view on that, really, Sam?
I mean, the view I could take if I was in a practice setting would be to look at what evidence do I have as a practice to, again, provide clients, or for this case building control, with comfort that the practice have that competence to undertake that role, because in the legislation it doesn't say anything about registration or anything. So what we're trying to do is, because we've been involved in this trailing back to Grenville, and we know what's been expected of us as an industry. But if you work to the legislation, I think that's what you can do. That's what I do currently, until such time as we can get something in place. I mean, RIB, I know they're doing something, we're doing something as well, as well as others. But that's the only thing I could say. I think with building control, I think they're acting outside their jurisdiction, to be honest, on this one, because
I get that feeling.
Yeah, because if you look at it, CDM is not within their territory. Okay, that's not their business. That's a health and safety executive matter. It's not in the regulations. Secondly, with the new regulations that do relate to building regulations and design of buildings, you only need to appoint a PD when that work starts on site. So they should not be asking for, this is for non-HRBs, they should not be asking if you're the PD or anything to do with PD until that happens. So I think they're really out of their jurisdiction, or working not working within the regulations, actually.
Yeah, well, on a few projects where we're making building reg applications, that specific question, who is the principal designer, is there on the application form, and they won't register it without the details.
Yeah,
and I agree with you. I think they're maybe a little bit beyond what they should be doing. Yeah, they won't register the application without the information.
Yeah, and another thing is you should ask them if they're competent, because they've been given until April to demonstrate their competence.
I know, yeah. It just seems a mess for maybe 6 months at least. But
yeah. I mean, I really feel for you guys, because it's your day job and it's your livelihood, and we'll certainly do our best to work as hard as we can to get something in place. But the more and more I think about this particular role as PD, and I think there's thinking back to my involvement with the development of 8671, there's various iterations. There was lots of things were put in the bin, things came backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. There's still, I think, a confusion that the PD is somehow the lead designer, and that's not how I see it. You undertake your duties as lead designers. You're appointed by a client as lead designers. You could undertake that function as PD. If you take, I'll use my good friend Gary Mees, he's not here, but Gary, as you know, is past president and is involved in lots of this stuff. But Gary is a single practitioner, so he will be PD, he will be lead designer, he will be designer. So you'll undertake all these three things for a client. But the PD role, I think, is, the more I'm looking at this, I think we have to be sensible about what we think this role is and what we're asking that person to do and to be competent to do, rather than actually driving back into being a lead designer. If I'm correct in my assumption.
Yeah, I don't want to hog the airwaves. I'll hand it over to somebody else. But yes, I mean, if you've got any influence, Sam, I've said since they changed the CDM coordinator to the name principal designer.
Yes.
Principal designer is an absolutely terrible title for the job. It shouldn't be used.
Yeah,
there's a CDM coordinator, that was fine, and now they want a building reg coordinator, which would be the PD building regs. Yeah, principal designer is a terrible title. It should not even be there.
No, I agree. It's like, I mean, I always think about principal ballerina. I don't know why, but because it's just I mean, and then Dan waxes lyrically about this, and I'll let her speak about it. But we've tried our best to. That this term not to be used for this piece of legislation. It's wrong, but also the confusion between a PD for the CDM regulations, a PD for the building regulations, and it's really confused.
It is. It's making it far too confusing, and it needs to be a lot simpler and a lot clearer. Plain English needs to be used with this legislation, and the government's missing that by a mile.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this is the first time I've ever seen legislation coming out without any guidance.
There's
no guidance at all. Yeah,
it's a disgrace.
Yeah. And that's what, we're thinking, Tara's away currently on a short break, but we're looking at as an institute what we can do in terms of really hitting back, just to, maybe I'm far too forthright in what I say sometimes. So, but it's really kind of
good for you, Sam. We're behind you.
But it's about being tactical with this, but really it is such a mess. And I know this has been recorded, but it really, it's not that I'm worried about what I'm saying. I know I'm correct in what I'm saying, but we need to challenge what's there.
Absolutely.
Anyway, who else? Jag.
Good morning, guys. Sam, thanks for just doing the presentation. So at the moment, I run a small practice in Kidderminster and Halesowen. So we offer commercial and residential projects. Yeah. So at the moment, as part of all the REBA stages of work, we do project management as well. So there's often the PD role which we take on. So if we're offering the services as PD, and now that we've got this registered, just say, for example, if CIAT say, well, Jag, we don't want you to be doing PD roles, but I'm already undertaking that. Is this register telling me that now that potentially I could not be doing it?
No, I mean, I think that sounds. I mean, don't look at this as a negative. We're not doing this negatively. We're not trying to, I'm seeing elsewhere. There's misinterpretation. They're trying to create, re-examining you as a member. And that's wrong. We want you to tell us what you're doing, and we're going to be verifying that, and that's it, done. So we're not, we are hopefully a simple application process. There'll be something about projects you're working on, some evidence of projects, maybe to have that verified. We're not even sure. We're thinking about if we can do an online interview, and that's it, done. We're not going into screeds and screeds of CPD programs and stuff like that. This is your job. You keep yourself up to date. You work hard, and that's what we're going to build upon, the positives, not the negatives. If that gives you some reassurance.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, and Nora?
If I could just add to that. So within the legislation, it's my understanding that it's not mandatory for anyone to be on a register. However, under the Flex 8670 document, there is standardization that is being suggested for any organization that either runs a PD or the principal contractor register, because then that allows members of the public, clients, to check that they are appointing individuals that are competent. So hopefully that doesn't dissuade anyone who's already doing it. But if you want to provide prospective clients, users of the building, that assurance, that may be something that you want to go for. But again, it's not mandatory, but CIAT does feel that we should have this available for our members to be onto it, demonstrate their competence, and then also hopefully provide that assurance for any existing or prospective relationships that you have professionally.
Yeah, I mean, back to that Flex document, that will become mandatory when it becomes a British standard. So, and again, it's just about, again, it gives hopefully our members an opportunity to stamp their authority in the marketplace, that we have a register. You have demonstrated that you undertake this function competently, and that's all we're saying. We're not going into stupidity of reassessing what you actually do. We need to have it verified, but that's all we're asking to do. So it will be proportional. And again, I'm a chartered member of CIAT, but I use myself all the time. I'm not going to register a PD, so we can't say every chartered member of CIAT can undertake a PD role, and that would be wrong. But we're happy to confirm those that are undertaking that role in practice. That's okay. It's not a problem. And we have to recognise the diversity. I mean, you could be a chartered member and you're working as a designer on a project, but you might never be a PD, but that's fine as well. So there's understanding that there's lots of different roles that we have. And I think the kind of example we gave with Eddie's press release is to say, some members saying, oh, if I'm a chartered member, that's enough. Well, I'm saying, well, actually, if you go for a job, you make an application, you maybe have some referees, and you kind of show some of your work. because otherwise you could just mean I'm a chartered member, I'll just take you on. I won't even look at you, you know, and that would be wrong. So we're going to have a relatively light touch approach, but making sure that there is some degree of, again, as an institute, if we're registering you as certified to undertake this function, we have to make sure if we are audited, we must make sure that our systems are robust enough to demonstrate that having you on the register meets with the requirements. Any more questions? Hear my own voice in my head. Don't feel frightened to ask questions. I apologise if I talk too much.
I've got a question.
Yep.
So as we were a little late coming into the meeting, so apologies. So as we know, the building regulations document states requests legally that we put down a principal designer's role.
Yep.
We're still going through our insurance company to ascertain the liability of that particular action.
Yep.
And we've been advised by NHBC that although we can put our name down as principal designer, albeit we're not yet qualified to be that role because the qualifications haven't been released yet for us to enable us to get that title, they've said that we can legally take our name off as principal designer should this situation develop to a point where we are no longer insured, liable, whatever. The question is, do people under CIAT, RIBA, are they the only people that can really be qualified as a principal designer under this new legislation? Or can Joe Bloggs in any practice say, well, I'm a principal designer, my insurance company is going to cover me, albeit well and good?
Yeah, I mean, again, involved with the writing of 8670 and 8671, we're trying to do our best this time to make this absolutely a design function, and it's quite, well, it would be almost impossible. It is impossible, I think, to be a PD in a PD in terms of the design role and function without being a designer. Okay, I think that's not feasible. You'd have to go back and you'd have to go through a whole raft of training experience, a whole range of things, education, to be able to evidence that. And I think this time the professional qualifications will mean a lot more in the marketplace in terms of you being able to evidence that you are a qualified principal designer. So I don't have any problems at all with that one. I mean, you know, it is difficult the way that the legislation has been written, because they keep on using the words agnostic, so they like to not use anything. You know, and stuff I've been involved with BSI, with lots of other things. They don't want to mention qualifications, don't want to mention the chartered, you know, this or the chartered that. They purposely don't. They say we can't refer to norms and things. It becomes nonsense. And I agree that, you know, that if things were properly written into legislation or British standards, it would help immensely.
Just a quick one again, Sam, if I could.
Yeah, okay.
Is your understanding from the new legislation that there's a requirement for a principal designer CDM and a principal designer building regs, so they're two separate roles?
They are two separate roles, and certainly in terms of legislation is very, I think, clear. This relates to building regulations in terms of getting building warrant approval. You know, that build happening on site. I'm not quite sure in reality what that means in terms of a PD and the contractor role. That's not even quite clear either. But it's very much a very different role from a CDM role. And I think that's certainly in 8671, that's very clear. I understand the RIBA, they're trying to combine the two things, and they are, in my view, that there are two different things. I think in CIAT, we believe they're two different roles. You could be qualified to do two, that's not a problem, but there are two separate things. And I think if you're offering those roles to a client, you have to make sure, I think you have to say these are additional roles. And I think back to the previous questions, that sometimes in a project you could end up being PD by default. So yes. You might say, I'm not the PD. Sorry, you could end up being the PD by default. So I think it's important to understand that you're either better being it or not being it, or making sure somebody else is. And I think this is the danger. So your insurance company might say something, but the reality is you can end up carrying the can. So I think that's another thing is you have to be careful of.
Yes, I mean, just going on from that PD from building regs role, what's scaring me and has scared me since I've seen it written down is that the responsibility that PD for building regs ensures that all other parties comply with the building regs, i.e. structural engineers, mechanical and electrical engineers.
Yeah.
And with the best will in the world, I'm a qualified technologist, I'm a qualified architect. I don't know how to check structural calcs. So how the hell in God's name can I ensure that the structural engineer has designed his beam to the right calculations and loadings and everything else? So what's your view on that, Sam? How can we navigate?
I mean, I wholly agree. I mean, all the one usual wriggle room. There's always things like the reasonable.
That's a big word, reasonable.
But you're right. I mean, I had this discussion with my students this morning. I kind of we look at the programs, and we still do some teaching and structural calculations. But I said to them, look, you'd never do that in practice, because nowadays, way back, I would do some simple calcs for building warrants, but I wouldn't even dream of doing that now.
Even when I wouldn't even cover us for that.
No. I mean, you're not coming. Certainly, when latterly I did practice, my insurance didn't allow me to do calculations, so that was good.
Yes, absolutely. So how do we navigate that then?
I think, and I agree. And these are difficult things. It's more. I mean, the qualification. Hopefully, getting you certified and registered, that's not a problem. But it's a practice that we need to help you with and guidance. And hopefully through Diane and her team and our professional indemnity insurers, we'll be able to get some guidance on that one. But it is, I mean, I couldn't, I mean,
the only way I thought about handling it is that each consultant puts a statement forward to say that they from their point of view, they have reasonably met the building regs.
I think that's all you can really do. I think this is where hopefully Dan and her team and working with others as well is looking at if you are PD, what you'd get them to have to sign off on, that they confirm that they've been working to regulations. And certainly in Scotland, I mean, we have systems that are quite clear. Our procedure regulations are pretty good. So you have things like, the structural part. There's a piece there. So you get a structural engineer who takes on board that bit in the regulations and certifies the structure. We have bits for the thermal regulations, section 6, and that's certified by somebody. And we've got the MEP. So that's all clear in the Scottish regs. I'm not so sure it's so clear in English regulations about that certification.
There's one more question, Sam, from Hassan.
Hassan, okay, sorry. I should be up. I should have opened my side panel. Apologies. Right.
Yeah, that's okay, Sam. Thank you for that. I just wanted to add a couple of points, really. So, just in relation to the point about sort of having back-to-back agreements with other consultants. So, as if we were the principal designer, so we can then provide that declaration at the end of a project. So I was speaking with I don't know if you know the name, but Dieter Bentley Gochman from he's a technical advisor at the RIBA, and so having had a chat with him yesterday in person actually. So I asked this very question, and his response back was suggesting that if we were to ask someone to provide a statement that's not required by law, because by law they're not required to provide that statement.
Mm.
It puts them in quite a difficult position, because by them providing that statement, if there ever was a problem, they won't be able to get out of it, because they've
Yep.
provided a statement in writing. So that's the difficult position I think we'll find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And just on the point about the principal designer role in itself, so my understanding is the legislation, the way it's written, it doesn't have to be a designer, it doesn't have to be anybody, as long as they meet the competency criteria. And what I'm finding is, having spoken with a lot of senior approved inspectors who are now actually considering leaving the industry because of all
Yeah.
the sort of all the processes
Yep.
they've got to get to
Yep.
re-register. They're actually considering going down that route, because they still get to do what they enjoy doing. And
Yep.
so my understanding of the principal designer role is not that you have to be a designer, but it's to understand what it takes to build a building. So it's understanding what an M&E consultant does, what an architect does, what a technician does.
Yep.
It's understanding all those roles and
Mhm.
being able to coordinate them as a team. The lead designer would still remain us.
Yep.
So we'll coordinate the team. We still know what everybody else is up to, and we'll lead the team and
Yep.
get that sort of side of things done. But the principal designer would be that overarching person or organisation that signs off those declarations at the end of a project. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, and that's where you get this kind of confusion or overlap between the PD and the lead designer. So, and as a say as a practice, you get you sign up with a client to undertake a piece of design. You advise the client to say they need to appoint a structural engineer, MEP, and whatever else you need. And then besides that, they're going to have to appoint a PD for design. So it's very it's kind of complicated when you start trying to work through how this is going to be put into practice, and in many ways it's almost an overlaying something that actually happens already, because if the client is properly appointing the people, and maybe the role of PD is to make sure that the proper team is in place, rather than actually being ultimately responsible for signing off anything. And again, this thing about back to the thing that you can end up PD by default, or the client can end up being PD by default. So there are things there that go beyond what you would be undertaking as a practice. You'd be going through because you know what you'd need. You probably know you'd be appointing a structural engineer or a building services engineer, and it's. Again, it's just there's no guidance, and that is a real problem that I think we're all facing. It's trying to kind of make sense in this kind of swamp, and it's full of alligators. So we don't want to be gobbled up by the alligators. So trying to get the building control authorities to meet even the building safety regulator. That's not clear either. People are on the committee are not clear. There's just it's I don't say it's heading for a car crash, but a lot of this should have been thought through before it was put into action.
Yeah,
I think your description of a car crash there is very good, Sam. I think that's exactly what we're into.
Yeah,
and it's a disgrace the government's put us in this position, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what annoys me. I kind of. I'll put my hand up when things go wrong, but I think we've been beaten up unfairly as an industry. The Grenville was a dreadful disaster, as we know, but there's so many things in the industry where people work in really hard conditions for not a lot of money, producing, whole buildings that work well and perform well, and are safe places to be. And we get accused of being incompetent. And you look at this reeks of incompetence that anybody could put this legislation out and expect everybody to suddenly become, competent to undertake. It's just nonsense.
Yeah.
What will be interesting, Sam, is what happens because at the minute when the client appoints the principal designer, they've obviously got to do their due diligence to make sure that there's competencies in place to appoint that person.
Yep.
And then the principal designer, which, you know, maybe architect, technologist, or another person. Now, then, if we're then as designers appointing other sub-consultants, we've got to make sure that they have those sort of same competency frameworks in place. Now, I suppose my concern at the minute is it only seems to be the designers, i.e. Either us or the architects, that are really leading this from the front. What about the other consultants who really also need to be getting up to speed with all the competency requirements?
Yeah, I mean, and they are. I mean, I'm working with a whole raft of people. I'm working with ARB, RIBA, ICE, iStruct, the Engineering Council, and I mean, again, some engineers are on the group I chair, and they're leading big projects, and they say they operate as a PD role. So it's not necessarily just confined to architectural technology and architects, but everyone's facing the same issues. Of trying to understand what this is about, because it's almost like saying, hold on, we kind of do this anyway, so what are we being asked to do here?
Yeah, I mean, that is fair. I mean, a lot of this we are, as lead designers, already fulfilling, really.
Yeah, I know, as I say, it's I'm trying to kind of, in my head, trying to get, where is this additionality in this role? Where's the value added in this role? And there's not a lot actually in that. In terms of, if you undertake as professional people, you undertake a project, you advise your client to appoint appropriate people, and you get on and do the job, and that's it done. It does say it's a bit belt and braces, but you know, it's. I'm not saying it's CDM is a more difficult piece of legislation because, you know, personally, I wouldn't like to do a risk assessment of a construction project based on a design to determine the health and safety of the operatives on that project. That is very hard to do. I'm comfortable designing a project, meeting regulations for that building to perform as intended. That's very different. So this one, because of, fair enough, there was a lot of things went wrong in Grenville that caused that dreadful fire to kill so many people. But you know, there are ways to have addressed those issues without what we've asked to do now.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Chairman, just mindful in the chat. Sorry, Hassan. There's a couple of other people waiting as well. So Glenn and Andrew are waiting, and we're probably going to have to wrap this up soon.
Oh, I'm enjoying it, James.
Okay, well, we can carry as long as you're available, Sam. But I'm just mindful that Glenn and Andrew have been waiting quite a while.
No, it's okay. No, I mean, I can carry on. Don't worry. I'm not. My next appointment's not the 1:30, but I'd have to be finished by 1.
There you go. You potentially got another hour there, member. Should we let Glenn come in then? That's
right,
okay.
Okay. Right. You can chair, James. You bring the people in. I'll answer the questions.
Okay.
Sam, hi, James. My question actually is one that's just been raised in the chat by David, and it's more to do with say on smaller domestic projects later down the line. Smaller contractors that we work with, for instance, when I speak to them, they have very little knowledge in regards to the Building Safety Act. And I suppose as us as lead designers and potentially PDs, is that we have to come up with a list of contractors for the client, and we have to also then demonstrate that those contractors can meet the guidance set out in the Building Safety Act. So I suppose really, do you have any kind of ideas or comments on how that can be managed?
I mean, if I'd answer, I would tell you. it is very difficult because there's things, you know, it's not say it's difficult enough. I mean, you know, managing a design team as I've done myself in the past is relatively straightforward. Okay, you might be some issues, but in reality, but for me to be responsible as a principal designer about appointing contractors that are competent or subcontractors that are competent, I would hold my hands up in horror. It's actually, we'll have to put something in place again, about them verifying that they are going to be working to the regulations, in terms of the build of that project, in terms of what's been approved by building control in terms of that warrant, and they were not to deviate from that approved warrant. And if there are any deviations, they must obviously refer back to the design team to make sure that these that these amendments or changes would be verified by building control, etc. That's the only way I can see it working. But it's going to be, we're going to end up with lots of pieces of paper, about making sure that we all cover our own backs, because otherwise, if we don't, then it's going to be an utter mess. Anything else?
Good. So the next one was Andrew F. And then Matthew after Andrew.
Okay. Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the chat. I just thought I'd chip in. I work at EPR Architects in London, where Dieter is our Director of Technical and Legal Services. So we're lucky enough to have him on tap, as it were. And a lot of obviously internally we've had a lot of various CPDs and advice and what have you and things like that. Just to pick up on a couple of points that were made. I mean, our understanding, I'm not talking for Dieter, by the way, so don't take what I'm saying as I don't want to misinterpret anything he's told us, but I think our understanding is that, and I think the point has been made in the chat, that the intentions of the legislation are that, you know, the sort of chain of responsibility isn't all directed in one direction. So things people have mentioned about competence of other consultants or sub-consultants or appointing, I think it's incumbent, my take anyway, is it's incumbent on all the various consultants, whomever they are, designing consultants, to prove their own competence. So, you know, your structural engineers, your M&E engineers, whomever, you know, and your architects, designers, such, and I don't think it's, might be wrong, I don't think it's the principal designer's responsibility to assess and confirm that competence. And I think the point was made that it all kind of goes back to the client, doesn't it? You know, the client
absolutely, yep,
has the overarching
yep,
responsibility to assess and confirm the competence, and
yep,
it's incumbent upon us to sort of show our working, if you like, and show our competence to them.
Yep.
So I think internally we're sort of working, or Dieter and our technical team are working up a sort of a framework that where we as individuals within the practice can sort of a framework of individual CPDs, CVs, if you like, where, you know, we sort of document our training requirements, our sort of our where we think we need to upskill and all those sort of things, just so that we as part of a project team, so that we as a practice to take on the role as PD, which I know Dieter thinks as lead designer you're in the best position to do, because it's supposed to be the designer in control of the design work, isn't it? And so, you know, we're as usually lead designer sort of best placed to sort of take that on. So interestingly and anecdotally, on a current project, and we do a lot of HRBs, current project I'm working on, because we're not yet in a position as a practice to sort of offer that service as such. They have employed an external company who were, I guess, ostensibly previously a CDM coordinator, are now offering that service in collaboration, I think, with an approved inspector to fulfill the building regs, the registered building inspector role. You know, so an external company are offering this service, which I think Dieter thinks is sort of contrary to the intention of the legislation, you know, which should be, it's the people involved, you know.
That's correct. It was never really intended. We were trying to we didn't see this as I think we all felt this was somebody within the team, you know, the design team, not somebody external. that was going to be parachuted in, or another external organisation. But there isn't anything in legislation that says that you can't do that, because you're right. Everything goes back to client. If it's a client who's going to be nailed to the door if this goes wrong, and that's really probably a good thing, because in a way, you know, that they're going to have to be really made aware that they're ultimately responsible for appointing a competent team, you know, a design team, principal designer, contracting team, principal contractor, and therefore there's a lot of guidance that's really needed for clients. Clients are going to be completely unaware, and again, as we all know in law, ignorance is no excuse for negligence. You know, you can't say, "I didn't know, Your Honour." Tough. You should have known. But there's you know, the ignorance that prevails within the industry, particularly on the contracting side, where often they're offering a design and build role in projects. They're going to come really unstuck with this.
Yep.
Matthew?
Yeah, I think Matthew next. Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Been interesting so far. Just a couple of observations. I work with HTC Architects. We're based in Leeds. Work on lots of commercial and retail projects. A couple of things I've noticed is that I think you can already apply through REBA to be a registered building regs PD. So if there's anybody out there that hasn't done that, that's an option you could perhaps explore. Just jumping back to the gent that was speaking before, I think the risk of trying to perhaps demonstrate your own competence can be problematic, I suspect, given that we all want to be insured, and I suspect the insurers will jump to an automatic default of we consider you competent provided REBA or CIAT or any other appropriate body agree with that. I think trying to demonstrate your own competency will be difficult. So I'd probably try and not explore that route and just go with REBA or CIAT, however. Then the last one to point out was just that I was interested by the fact that we could potentially become PD by default. I can't really see how that could happen, given legally you can only be PD if you have signed up and been appointed. So if there's no appointment in place, how could you drift to that point?
I mean, I think Dan's answered it. It's in the legislation, actually.
Right. Okay. So
so you have to be very careful. That's what you say. You could be, like in small projects, you could be the only designer, and as you said, that particularly domestic. So you could be undertaking that job, and you carry the can. You know, so it's in the bigger projects, the bigger design teams, it's you know, you tend to be, you know, more better informed. You know what's happening on the street. The smaller practices don't quite grasp that. So that's what will happen. Yeah.
So your position needs to be, as a professional, you need to advise your client that a PD needs to be appointed, but that's
absolutely
not necessarily us. It could be another party.
Because I mean, it'd be interesting. I mean, I'd be interested to say, you know, I don't know what would happen if you told your client to say, you know, I'm advising you to appoint a PD, and they don't. What would that happen if you were the only designer on the project? Would you be PD by default, or would the client be PD by default? So it's kind of, it's an interesting. I mean, no doubt the legal profession must be enjoying this, because they're the ones who are going to be making the money.
Yeah, suspect. Well, they usually do. I agree. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks. I mean, I understand the you know, it's difficult for us to give, you know, reassurance about everything's rosy in the garden, and to just be quite honest, it's not. I mean, you getting you registered and demonstrating your competence, that's the easy bit. It's how you put this into practice is the hard bit. And again, this is where hopefully as an institute we'll try and work hard with you guys to get the various you know, pieces of advice that would need to be there in terms of guidance notes, etc. And working with others. I know Dan does a lot of that anyway, and for that matter, working with the RIBA, and where we can share good practice, because it's all in our interests anyway.
Yeah. It's as one of the other chaps said earlier, I think the process is probably quite simple and follows that of CDM in terms of, as principal designer, you can issue the appropriate regulation and say to Mr. Structural Engineer, you know, can you deliver, can you complete your role and responsibilities under building regulations? That's fairly straightforward. The issue is, well, how do we check that?
I mean, you're right. I mean, you can only say, well, and probably in big projects or projects, not big project, any project now. I mean, if you're submitting to building control, you'll be doing your bit. You'll have a structural engineer who'll be satisfying their bit. So therefore, one assumes that that's okay. You're taking reasonable steps. Remember, it's the word reasonable.
Yeah.
This person's a chartered engineer, a structural engineer, and they've been appointed by the client to undertake this job. You've done your job as PD because you've got that structural engineer there to do that work, and they're complying with the regulations. It's the next bit on about the principal contracting, the contractor bit concerns me more.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I'm exhausted.
No. I think that's it, unless anyone's got a last minute.
But thanks for the questions, and I say it's kind of out with my territory, although I still remember working in practice at the hard end of things, so I've not lost sight of how difficult it is to practice, and particularly when you got this, you know, more and more legislation that you have to deal with. But I think I see it as an opportunity for CIAT and members of CIAT, because I think it's, if we're looking at that technical domain, you know, and then you look at the RIBA plan of work, I mean, that's meat and drink to CIAT members. So hopefully we can all, you know, benefit from this and drive forward the Institute in terms of seeing our role as it is a major role within the design process. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions, and I'm not sure if we plan to have any more of these, but I think they're very useful. Maybe we just do some different topics. And
we've got some lined up, so we're trying to work with CIAT Insurance Services and our legal advisors to host a presentation of a similar ilk around liabilities insurances. So Diane's leading on that one. We're also working with a large multidisciplinary practice who are very engaged with CIAT about giving a bit more insight into delving into some of the details and the expectations. So there's a few more webinars lined up or in the pipeline, and obviously we'll put them on the events calendar. They're going 80 weekly. They'll probably go on social media. So just keep an eye out really for promotion of access to those events as well. But my point to remind some people in the room is, to get on the register, you will need to be a chartered architectural technologist. So for those of you that aren't just yet, now is the time to give you access to apply for registration once it's published early in the new year.
Okay. Anyway, and the slides can be shared. So I think that's a point picked up just now. So we'll get that out to everyone as well.
The slides are on the CIAT website, Building Safety Hub already. So you can get those. But the idea is we're going to publish this webinar as well on the hub as well, so people can dial in at a later date and check it out. Okay.
Anyway, thanks very much for
Cheers,
listening.
Sam.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.